We're restructuring, Denise. Hope there are no hard feelings. It's just business. Kyle Brenner didn't even look up when he said it. His eyes stayed glued to the screen like I wasn't a person. Just another line item to delete. I sat there, staring at the edge of the conference table, letting the words settle. Restructuring, no hard feelings. Just business. I was too stunned to speak. I'm Denise Harper. I'm 63 years old, and I spent 29 years and 11 months at Northbridge Technologies. I came on board when the company was barely out of its startup phase. 2 buildings, maybe 60 employees. We didn't even have proper badge scanners back then. I was hired to manage facilities, but the truth is I did a bit of everything. When the pipes burst, I was there. When the CEO needed the rooftop HVAC replaced over Christmas, I climbed up and made it happen. I'd always been the person behind the scenes, making sure everything just worked. I raised my son while holding that job, kept the mortgage paid, put away for his college a little at a time. I missed birthdays and sleep and comfort so that I could show up on time and deliver every single day. I wasn't flashy, I didn't make waves, I just made sure no one else had to think about what could go wrong, because I'd already handled it. Now I was sitting across from a man who couldn't have been older than 35, holding a manila folder with my name on it, telling me my service was no longer required. 4 days, that's all I had left until I hit 30 years. 4 days from full pension benefits. And suddenly my job, my future, was gone. He finally glanced up. Of course, we appreciate everything you've done, Denise, truly, but the company's moving in a leaner direction. I nodded, not because I agreed, because I knew if I said what I wanted to say, they'd call security. I'd seen it happen before to people my age. Kyle didn't want a scene, he wanted quiet compliance, he got it. I signed the forms, slid my badge across the table, pulled the master keys from the carabiner I'd carried on my belt since before Kyle graduated college, and then I walked out. The lobby felt colder than usual. The receptionist avoided eye contact. The security guard I'd shared donuts with every Friday morning suddenly had somewhere else to be. I walked past the break room, past the cubicles where people I'd trained were pretending not to notice me leave. Outside, the sky was the same dull gray it always was in November. I climbed into my car. It started on the first try, like always, but something had shifted. 4 days short of the finish line, they cut me loose. Thought I'd just go quietly. They were wrong. I started at Northbridge when I was still figuring out how to start over. The divorce had taken half of everything, savings, the house, my peace. My son Liam was 5, and all I could think about was finding something stable enough to hold on to. Northbridge wasn't much back then. A tech company trying to find its footing, lots of talk about scalability and infrastructure, but mostly just confusion and ambition. I came in as a facilities coordinator. They needed someone to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. I became that someone. Every morning for 29 years, I was in the building before the sun came up. Coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. I fixed what broke, I managed vendors, budgets, inspections. When storms knocked out power, I stayed until the generators kicked in. When new offices opened, I oversaw the build-outs. I could walk through every square inch of that campus blindfolded and tell you where the wiring faults were buried. But my job wasn't just about fixing pipes and patching drywall. It was about people. I trained every facilities hire who came through those doors, taught them which contractors were honest, which ones cut corners, walked them through the blueprints, shared my checklists, showed them how to troubleshoot before problems became crises. Some of them moved on to better roles. Others stayed, but I always made sure they were prepared. That was my way of giving back, quiet mentorship, steady leadership. I didn't take sick days. Not because I couldn't, but because the work didn't stop just because I had a headache. I came in during snowstorms, stayed late when events ran over, responded to middle-of-the-night alarm calls without complaint. When Liam was in high school, he used to joke that Northbridge had become my second child. I used to laugh at that. But he wasn't wrong. I invested in that place like it was mine. I remember once, maybe 12 years in, I stayed up 42 straight hours managing a broken HVAC system in the data center during a July heat wave. If the servers had gone down, it would have cost the company hundreds of thousands. I patched the system, rewired a panel, and made sure no one ever knew how close we came to disaster. My manager at the time called it heroic. Kyle didn't even mention it in my termination. I gave that company the best years of my life, and I had the calluses, the paperwork, and the loyalty to prove it. The actual termination lasted less than 10 minutes. I was called into a conference room I'd cleaned more times than I could count. There was a folder on the table before I even sat down. Kyle didn't ask me how I was doing, didn't offer me water, just launched into the script he must have rehearsed. "We're restructuring, Denise. Hope there are no hard feelings. It's just business." I didn't say anything. I was afraid if I opened my mouth, something sharp and loud might come out, and I wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. He kept talking. Budget constraints, operational streamlining, legacy roles. A pile of sanitized buzzwords meant to smooth over the fact that he was cutting out the one person who could actually tell him which vendors were trustworthy and which walls hid asbestos. The manila envelope held it all: termination paperwork, COBRA information, my final paycheck. The pen they gave me was one I'd ordered myself 3 years ago for the department. I signed anyway. I always signed things carefully. My mother raised me to finish what I started, even if it ended badly. When Kyle asked for my keys, I unclipped the ring from my belt loop. It had been with me for so long that the denim was permanently worn where it rested. Those keys opened everything: equipment rooms, storage, even the executive suite. I handed them over without a word. He held out his hand for my badge. I paused for a second. The photo on it had been taken when my hair was still black and I still believed in retirement parties and gold watches. I placed it gently in his palm, watching his fingers curl over it like it was just another item on a checklist. I stood up. Nobody walked me out. I didn't need an escort. I knew every corner of that place better than the back of my own hand. I walked past the front desk where Amanda pretended to check her screen, past the finance cubicles where the new hires I'd trained were suddenly too busy to look up. No one said goodbye. No one stood. The silence followed me all the way to the door. The parking lot was half full. My car, 10 years old but well-maintained, sat in the same spot it always had. I slid in, started the engine, and stared at the building. It looked smaller from this side of the glass, more temporary, less like home. I sat there for a long time. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the timing. It wasn't just the way Kyle avoided eye contact. There was something else, something cold and calculated about it all. 4 days. That's what kept repeating in my mind. 4 days from 30 years, 4 days from a secure retirement. And now I had nothing but questions and a growing suspicion that this wasn't just business. That night, I spread the paperwork across my kitchen table, same way I'd done with Liam's school forms and tax documents over the years. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed slightly, another thing I'd always meant to fix but never got around to. I went through the papers line by line. Most of it was routine: final pay, benefits expiration, COBRA options, but when I got to the service calculation, my heart sank. 29 years and 10 months. That wasn't right. I'd started in December of 1994, December 12th, to be exact. I still remembered the way the building smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. And this was November 8th. That was 29 years and 11 months. 4 more days, and I'd have hit the full 30. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the old employee handbook, the one from 2009, when they revised the pension eligibility policy. It was clear as day. Employees are entitled to full retirement benefits after 30 years of continuous service or at age 65, whichever comes first. I was 63. That made the service milestone crucial, and they docked me a month? Deliberately? That's when I remembered something, an email from Kyle's office just last month. Company-wide updates to the employee handbook. I'd flagged it because it mentioned retirement benefits. I pulled it from my email archive and read it again. Effective immediately, all retirement benefit calculations will be based on continuous years of service as defined in the current employee handbook. Employees approaching retirement eligibility should review their service records to ensure accuracy. I read it 3 times. Then I got out my calculator and began digging through old pay stubs, vacation days, sick leave, overtime records. I had every single one going back 15 years. I wasn't a hoarder, I was methodical. Something my late father had drilled into me as a kid. Keep your papers in order. You never know when someone will try to rewrite your history. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. I had 29 years and 11 months of documented service. No gaps, no breaks, nothing to dispute. This wasn't an error, it was a strategy. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. My kitchen was quiet. My cat, Frankie, sat on the windowsill, tail flicking, watching the street like she knew something was coming. I could have ignored it. Could have told myself it was just bad timing, could have let it go. Yeah, but that voice in my head, the one that always knew when something wasn't right, was getting louder. They were counting on me to walk away, quietly, gratefully, maybe even ashamed. But I'd kept everything, every memo, every review, every policy update, and I wasn't going to let this slide. I sat there at the table long after midnight, paperwork still laid out in neat rows. My tea had gone cold. The house was still, except for the occasional creak in the floorboards. Old homes don't sleep quietly, neither did I. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was sharper, focused, like something inside me had clicked into place. This wasn't just about a job, it was about principle, about the years I gave them, the weekends I worked, the emergencies I handled, the trust I never broke. And now, someone who didn't know the first thing about integrity had penciled me out of the budget like I was overhead. I wasn't letting it end like that. I opened an old contacts folder I hadn't touched in years, scanned names I hadn't seen since Northbridge was half its current size. Then I saw her name. Linda Ashford, former Director of Human Resources. She'd retired the year before, sharp as ever, and by the book to her core. If anyone would know what to do, it was Linda. Her number was still active. I stared at it for a while. Calling her meant admitting what had happened, that I hadn't seen the warning signs, that I'd been cut loose like I didn't matter. But it also meant I wasn't giving up. It meant I was fighting back. So I picked up the phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Linda Ashford. Linda, it's Denise Harper from Northbridge. Pause. Denise, I heard. Word travels. That was all she had to say. No small talk, no pity, just quiet understanding. I told her everything, the timeline, the calculation discrepancy, the paperwork. Kyle. She listened, asked sharp questions, took notes. You kept your stubs? Memos, handbook revisions? Every single one? Another pause. Good. Denise, what they did isn't just unethical. It's illegal. I need you to come by Monday morning. Bring everything. I looked at the paperwork in front of me and nodded more to myself than to her. This wasn't over, not even close. By Sunday night, my dining room looked like a war room. 3 cardboard boxes, each labeled and sorted, sat neatly along the edge of the table. Inside them, 2 decades of pay stubs, performance evaluations, departmental memos, benefit statements, and printouts of every email I'd flagged over the years. My son called it overkill when he was a teenager. I called it insurance. Every holiday worked, every extra shift, every annual review where I was called critical to operations. It was all there. I even found the original offer letter dated December 12th, 1994. The start of everything. tucked into a manila folder behind my son's kindergarten progress report. I smiled when I saw it. He's 35 now, married, 2 kids of his own, and this document had aged better than I had. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I reread the last memo from Kyle's office, the one about updated benefit policies and accuracy. I thought about how bold he'd been to put it in writing, and how foolish. By Monday morning, I was in Linda's office by 8 a.m. She greeted me with a strong cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad already half filled with notes. We worked through the boxes together, page by page. She didn't rush. She didn't gloss over anything. Every time she found a record that contradicted the company's official account, she tapped her pen twice. When she reached the October memo from Kyle's office, she stopped, read it aloud, then looked up at me. "This is gold," she said. "He put in writing that records should be accurate. Then he signed off on your termination with an inaccurate calculation 4 days before your full pension kicked in." Her tone had shifted, no longer just procedural. There was steel in her voice now, something close to righteous anger. Either he's careless or he's covering his tracks. But either way, Denise, this is bigger than you. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She leaned back in her chair. "You're not the first. I've heard whispers. Other older employees being let go. Quietly. Always just short of their benefit milestones." She pulled out a form from her desk drawer. "We're filing with the Department of Labor today. You'll need to speak to an investigator. Bring everything. But don't say a word to anyone at Northbridge. Not a soul." I nodded. Whatever this was, it was no longer personal. It was systemic. The Department of Labor's downtown office didn't look like much. Gray walls, flickering lights, government-grade carpeting. But that morning, it felt like the most powerful building I'd ever stepped into. Linda met me outside, files tucked under her arm, heels sharp against the concrete. She introduced me to the investigator, a man named Rhodes, who looked no older than my son but had the demeanor of someone who'd seen more than he let on. He didn't waste time. "Ms. Harper, I understand you're here to file a formal complaint alleging wrongful termination and pension interference." I nodded. "I have documentation to support that." We sat in a windowless room for nearly 2 hours. I walked them through my employment history year by year. I showed them every performance review, every updated handbook policy, every pay stub and memo. Rhodes took notes carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow when I produced something especially damning. When I handed him the October memo, Kyle's own words about verifying service calculations, he looked up. "This memo is very useful," he said, flipping it over and making a note. "This suggests they were aware of the policy's importance, and yet they still acted in contradiction to it." Linda spoke up. "There's more. Denise isn't alone. I know of at least 2 other employees who were let go under suspiciously similar conditions. I'm working on getting them to come forward." Rhodes nodded slowly. "Then we may be looking at a pattern, and if that's true, this could go beyond civil penalties." He asked me not to speak to anyone at Northbridge. No calls, no social media posts, nothing that could tip them off. "Let them think they got away with it," he said. "That's when people get sloppy." As I walked out of the building, I felt something shift. It wasn't relief, it was readiness. A sense that this fight wasn't just mine anymore. They'd underestimated me. They'd counted on silence. But now I had allies. I had proof. And I had the law on my side. Whatever was coming next, I was ready. The first sign that Northbridge had caught wind of the complaint came 2 days later. My phone rang just after lunch. Caller ID, Kyle Brenner. I let it ring twice before answering. "Denise," he said, his voice too casual, too smooth. "I heard you've been talking to some people about your departure." I didn't respond, let the silence speak. "I hope you're not thinking of doing anything impulsive," he added. "This is a sensitive situation." There it was, framed as concern wrapped in a threat. "I'm not looking for trouble," I said. keeping my tone even. "Good, that's good," he replied. Because if someone were to make allegations without understanding all the facts, well, the company would have no choice but to protect itself. That might involve reviewing your record, looking into anything that might suggest misconduct, breaches of policy, things like that. I felt a chill creep up my spine. It wasn't even subtle. He was warning me, fall in line or we'll tear you apart on paper. But what Kyle didn't know was that Linda had already filed the complaint. The investigation was already in motion. They weren't just looking at my termination, they were looking at patterns. I hung up without another word. That night, Linda called with an update. "They've assigned a second investigator," she said, "criminal division." I blinked. Criminal? Yes, Denise, this isn't just a wrongful termination anymore. If they used electronic communication to coordinate benefit denial, that falls under wire fraud. Intentional interference with federally protected benefits, that's a serious offense. I sat down slowly. Linda continued, "They're pulling personnel files for 3 other employees who were terminated just before their pensions vested, all in their 60s. All with suspicious service miscalculations." And get this, Kyle and the HR director discussed benefit obligations in writing, on company email. I exhaled. So they've been planning this. For a while, she confirmed. They called it proactive workforce management. You were listed as a legacy expense? I felt something settle deep inside me, not rage, not sorrow, something older, colder, clarity. They thought they were playing chess with someone too old to see the board. They thought I'd go quietly. But they'd made the wrong assumptions, and now their game was over. Thursday morning, I sat in a downtown federal building across from 2 investigators in dark suits. One of them, Agent Thomas, had already read through most of my documentation. The other, a woman named Velasquez, was with the Criminal Enforcement Division. She watched me closely as I described the last 6 months at Northbridge. They recorded everything. I explained how my budget proposal suddenly came under scrutiny, how meetings moved ahead without me, how a new hire started shadowing my duties without explanation. Then I showed them the October memo, my service timeline, and the pay stubs that proved 29 years and 11 months of continuous service. Thomas nodded slowly, jotting notes, while Velasquez asked pointed questions. "Did anyone ever formally dispute your start date?" "No," I said, "until the termination paperwork." "And you have documentation showing your start date?" I reached into my file box and pulled out my original offer letter. Dated December 12th, 1994. Signed and stamped. Velasquez glanced at Thomas. "That's deliberate." Then came the printouts. They showed me emails, ones I had never seen. Exchanges between Kyle and the HR director, Patricia Walsh. Cold, clinical, full of strategy. "This one's key," Velasquez said, pointing to a line highlighted in yellow. "Target Q4 exits for high liability roles. Denise Harper to be phased out by November 8th. Pension hits threshold November 12th. My stomach turned. I wasn't a name to them. I was a financial liability, a number on a spreadsheet, something to be phased out. Agent Thomas folded his hands. "Ms. Harper, what we're seeing is a deliberate scheme. Multiple employees, yourself included, were strategically terminated just before reaching full benefit eligibility. That's not poor management. That's fraud." Velasquez continued, "And because they used company email to plan this, it's wire fraud. That means federal charges. If we move forward, and we will, you'll likely be called to testify." I nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay quiet, stay available, and don't engage with anyone from Northbridge," Thomas said. "From this point forward, it's an open investigation." By the following Monday, the Department of Labor had subpoenaed Northbridge internal communications. IT servers were imaged. Staff were quietly interviewed, and by Wednesday, a search warrant had been executed on Kyle's office. Linda kept me informed through it all. They documented everything, she said. Spreadsheets, timelines, even a slide deck presented to the board. One slide was titled Legacy Employee Transition Strategy. My name was on that slide. Along with 3 others, we were listed under Q4 optimization targets. They thought they were being efficient, strategic, clever, but they weren't expecting scrutiny, or resistance, or someone like me to keep every receipt and memo for nearly 3 decades. What they called a transition strategy, the law had another word for: conspiracy. There it was in bold letters across the business section of the local paper. Kyle Brenner's face, usually so smug, so sure of itself, was captured mid-blink, stepping out of a black SUV, looking unprepared and off balance. By Friday, Northbridge's board had convened an emergency session. Patricia Walsh was placed on leave. Kyle stopped showing up altogether. Then my phone rang. It wasn't Kyle this time. It was Northbridge's corporate lawyer, the real kind, the kind who gets called when public relations can't fix the damage. Ms. Harper, I'm calling on behalf of the board. We'd like to offer full reinstatement of your pension, health care coverage, and additional compensation. How much compensation? I asked flatly. We're prepared to offer $50,000 in exchange for a full release of legal claims. I didn't answer, just let that offer sit in the air like the insult it was. I called Linda. Don't even consider it, she said immediately. They're scared, and they should be. Because it wasn't just me anymore. Within days of the investigation going public, more former employees stepped forward. One was let go 3 days before their benefits matured. Another just 2 weeks shy, each with paperwork misaligned with their actual service dates. The pattern was undeniable. By Tuesday, the Department of Labor confirmed that 15 other cases had been reopened, and the SEC had started sniffing around too, something about misleading pension liabilities on financial disclosures. Then came the footage. Channel 6 aired the clip at noon, Kyle Brenner being led out of the Northbridge building in handcuffs. Federal agents behind him carrying boxes of hard drives and folders. Patricia Walsh followed, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. The reporter spoke calmly, but every word landed like a hammer. Federal prosecutors allege that Chase and Walsh coordinated a systematic scheme to terminate employees nearing pension eligibility to reduce long-term liabilities. The camera caught Kyle stumbling slightly as he was helped into a government vehicle. He looked nothing like the man who had stared down at me over that termination folder. Now he just looked small. The indictment listed 14 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Each carried a potential 5-year sentence. And as I watched the door close behind him, I felt something settle. Not revenge, not even satisfaction, just clarity. They had tried to erase me to save a balance sheet, and they failed, not because I yelled, not because I made threats, but because I paid attention, because I had proof, because I had the patience to let the truth do what it does best, cut clean. And now the system was doing its job. Kyle Brenner had once told me it was just business. Turns out it was also illegal. 3 months later, I was in my kitchen rolling out dough for the lemon bars my granddaughter loved so much. The radio played oldies softly in the background, and the smell of sugar and citrus filled the room. My pension checks had started arriving right on time. My health coverage was reinstated, and the $200,000 settlement, plus legal fees, was quietly deposited into my savings. I hadn't touched it yet. I didn't need to. Kyle had pleaded guilty to federal charges, 18 months in a federal facility followed by supervised release. Patricia Walsh got 6 months and probation. Northbridge was acquired by a larger tech firm, one that swept the executive ranks clean and rebuilt the HR department from the ground up. They asked me to speak to the press, to give interviews. I declined. I wasn't interested in being a headline. I wasn't a symbol or a cautionary tale. I was just someone who kept her receipts. Liam called the day the story broke nationally. He'd seen the segment online and heard my name mentioned in the context of federal reform. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. You didn't let them win. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. I packed the lemon bars in a tin lined with wax paper and drove them over to my granddaughter's house. She met me at the door, already grinning. "Nana, you made the good ones." "The good ones take time," I told her. And as I watched her take a bite and close her eyes in delight, I realized something. I'd spent decades fixing what others broke, but now I was finally making something sweet on my own terms. Loyalty used to mean something. I gave nearly 30 years of my life to that company, believing that hard work earned respect and dedication brought security. But when they decided I was too expensive to keep, they underestimated what quiet persistence could do. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't burn the place down. I just kept my records, called the right person, and let the truth speak louder than revenge ever could. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like a bookshelf, a check arriving on time, or the quiet knowing that they can't take away what you've earned.